Hello and welcome to my channel. Hi, I'm Wendy Haney. Today I'm going to show you how to make a table runner with these 60-degree triangles. A subscriber, Diane, had sent me a picture and wanted to know, how do I do this? So did a little figuring out and went, oh yeah, this is how you do that. So I didn't want to do a whole quilt, but I figured, you know what? We're going to do a quick and easy table runner that gets the gist of it and shows you how to do it. Originally, I was going to just do one, but by the time I practiced on one and then showed you how to do another one, I figured I'd show you two different methods to finish it. One using the birthing method and the other one with your traditional binding. This does require a special ruler, which I've probably set somewhere. I'll take a picture of it and put a note here. This is what happens when you start one weekend and finish another weekend. Things get moved. So stay tuned and learn how to make this beautiful table runner. This is actually going to go on top of a bookshelf where my coffee pot is in my office rather than on a table. I'm going to go put it on there right now and see how it looks. For this table runner, we're going to need 2 strips with the fabric, 4.5-inch wide strips, 2 of them of your 2 fabrics, your light and your dark, because I wanted mine to be about 2 feet long and 8.5-ish inches wide. That's why I chose the 4.5-inch strips for my triangles. And what I've discovered is that we need 12 triangles of your dark and 10 of your light. Plus, for the light, since you're going to use those on your edges, you need 4 extra that we're going to cut and trim off at the end. Also, I'm using this ruler by Creative Grids called the 60-degree equilateral triangle ruler. It makes cutting out these triangles very, very easy. And yes, there's a way for you to cut, I guess you'd call it a 30-degree, a half of one. But I'm going to be honest with you, I kept struggling with getting it right so the half triangles were the right direction for my ends. So I figured out, you know what? Either way, I'm going to lose some, so I'm just cutting triangles all the same. Okay, so let's show you how to cut these. Simplest thing is, since we're going to do just 2 colors, is put your fabrics on top of each other. I do it right sides together. And what I've discovered for the one I'm doing for a 4.5-inch triangle, about 8.5 inches of your fabric length, you get 2 triangles. Therefore, for this table runner, if you're doing it about the size I am, you're going to need two strips of your fabric. If you want to go shorter, you need less, but you can do the math and figure out what size you need. Okay, so line up your fabric so it's all nice and even. And if you're not comfortable doing this layered with your fabrics on top of each other 2 at a time, then don't. Do each fabric separately. It doesn't matter. You're going to do the same thing. Okay, so you're going to take your ruler, and as I said, I'm doing a 4.5-inch triangle. So all of my strips are 4.5 inches wide. So I'm going to just line up the blunt end, and the nice thing about this ruler, it's always already cut off that point of your triangle. So I'm going to cut the first one. Okay. Now I have one of my light and one of my dark. You do not need to move your fabric. What you're going to do is you're going to move your ruler instead. Put your blunt end of the ruler at the bottom. And then if your strips are 4.5 inches wide, the line for 4.5 inches should be there also. And you're going to cut. And guess what? Whoopsie! Yep. Every once in a while on my end, maybe I need to cut my blade. So now that I did that, I'm going to want to realign my fabric since it got a little kitty wampus. And along those lines, if you're doing enough of these, you might get to the point where, oh, it's not quite lining up for you, and you're like, oh, to get that line and that even, it's not quite right. Not a problem. Just shift it a little to the left and trim off that. In other words, getting everything all nice and neat again. There we go. So you're going to just keep doing that until you have your sets. So I needed, like I said, 12 dark and ultimately 14 of my lights. So I could do 12 sets of these across my 2 strips of fabric. Okay, I am going to set those aside, because then once you have everything cut out, the simplest thing to do then is lay out your layout. And because we want the light on the end, we're going to start with that. And literally, you just layer these. And every once in a while you do that and you go, oh, that one worked. But usually I put the blunt end opposite. So the blunt end on my darks is always at the top, and the blunt end on my lights are on the bottom. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm not going to get them all laid out here, but this is what you're going to do. And then your other one, because we're doing these opposites of each other, whoops, that's my dark, not my light. Your lights are going to go like this. Okay, either way, get them laid out. Then, once you have it laid out, and I'm going to stop doing all that. So once you have it laid out, then what I start doing is doing one at a time. I pick up one, I put my light on top of my dark, and I can line up the edges of the fabric because you've got your blunt cut on both ends. That means everything's going to line up here. And it's important. I take that back. You don't want to do that. You're going to want to line up your triangle. Okay? So over here on this side, it should all be lined up, and then pin it. Because once you get to the sewing machine, you will not know what side you're supposed to trim. So if you flip it over, everything matches up. Okay? So you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to come through here, map them up, map up your angles, and pin. Do that with all of those, and then sew those all together. So now you're going to have pairs for both rows. Get those done first, and then I'm guessing you're going to know what we're going to do. We're going to put those pairs together. Now have my pairs of my light and my dark triangles. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 pairs because I have 6 of the darks. I kept the light over here on the right. So I line them all up, make sure I got my ducks in a row for all of them, and then we just start putting, as you guessed it, one on top of the other. And once again, usually what I do is I kind of line up the point down here. Oh, by the way, I'm pressing everything to my darker block in these. So right now I've got it pressed, so there's a dog ear hanging off the bottom. So that's kind of a nice thing to match up with this triangle there. But in general, you're down about 1/4 of an inch there, and pin this so that when you take it to the sewing machine, you know where to stitch your 1/4 of an inch. And then you can just do that with each of your pairs. So you're going to have 3 pairs all lined up and ready to go for each row. Okay? So you'll end up with 6 pairs because you've got 2 rows of your triangles. I'm going to set those aside because I already have the second row done. And yeah, I did the same for the second row, making sure this side here has a light color. What's going to happen is because of the layout we need, there's not enough room for everything. I need to end with a light over here. As I said, you could use the ruler and put it on an end, and then you want to line it up on the 1/4 inch line. So in this case, don't line it up on the center to cut. He's going to be very unhappy because your half triangle's not big enough. It's got to be on the left side or the right, depending on where it is. And then, so in this case, I need, yeah, okay, this could actually work out. So, and then make sure everything's still straight on the bottom and on the top. And I'm doing the, yeah. Okay. So now I have that. So at the end of this strip, I should be able to put that on there, and I have a straight edge here. If you'd rather not mess with that, then just put another one of your full triangles on, okay? And this is what I'm going to do. I think it just makes it easier to trim up at the end anyway. So I'm going to set that one aside for later. Okay, go get your 2 rows completely done, laying them out. So once you've got your pieces, your pairs together, so you're going to have pairs, you're going to sew those pairs together. So you want 2 strips with the light. I need with the light on the left, and you're going to end up with a dark on the right, and then you're going to tack on one more light. So you've got lights on both ends. Have 2 rows completely sewn together. So a light on that end. And then we're ready to put our rows together. So this really does go together pretty dang quick. You should now have 2 rows with 6 of your dark fabric and both ends ending in a light. So you probably had to, as I showed you earlier, tack on a light to one of the ends. So then that's that one, and there we have our second one. Now we're ready to put it together. And note, the purple thing or some tool that has an end on it can come in very handy. In order to help make this more accurate as you're sewing things together here, oftentimes as you're feeding it through your sewing machine, it's easy to get the top right, but then as you get towards the bottom, it likes to shift a little, even if you're pinning it. And so I like to use my purple thing to kind of hold down that end and make sure it stays straight so I don't get a wonky point there. Okay, now what we have is we want to alternate. Actually, you can put these strips together any way you want. So if you actually want to do it this way, well, you can. Ooh, wow, okay, I kind of like that. Yeah, but the subscriber that asked for this was looking for the design where they were off center, like this, where you had your lights and your darks and they were off center. She was trying to figure out, well, how did they do that? So that is what we're going to do here. But that looks pretty slick too. This method, you're going to have more points to match with your fabric, whereas this method, you do not. Half a dozen one, six the other. The other option you could do, if you didn't want to have all your rows exactly together, and this makes it easier to not match points at all, is to throw a little sashing in between. There's a lot of things you can do with this basic layout of your rows. Okay, so we're going to do the design as it was requested, alternating. So you're going, okay, so how do I get those lined up? Well, what I did was go, okay, I'm going to put that on top of there. Great. Okay, flip it around. Then what I did was I grabbed a friction pen and a ruler. And what I did was for each of these where I want a point to be on the other side, I just went through. This should be a straight edge, and there's your intersection where your point is. And I'm going to take a picture and show it here. That you go, okay, that's my center. So I've marked it. So I just go down through all of these and do that. Okay? Then once you've done that on all of them, you can get your layers together by lining up that with your intersection of the other layer. Obviously, we's going to be doing some painting. So what I would do is go through and get that lined up on all of them. And you know what? If you find, ooh, I got a little bit more give in there, I think I'm going to be okay on this one. But you know what? This is something that if you need to fudge it a little in between, this one's going to be okay. You can do that. And actually, more than likely, once you get a couple of them, especially if you're dealing with a longer piece, you can probably just kind of a little bit wing it and go, yep, that's my center. In fact, that's what I'm going to do, because this looks pretty dang close to accurate. And you're going to just pin this all the way across. Yep. Center. Yeah. So I think once you get a few of them marked and you've got it started, then you're going to be able to do it. So then have it all pinned and you're going to go stitch a 1/4 inch all the way around. And now I have my mini table runner. And if you want a, bigger table runner, just add more rows. This is actually, I'm calling it a table runner, and I realize, it's a little misleading. Well, hang on. I can make it a table runner because I did this twice. We just take my other one and then add 2 more rows to it, or 3. This is going to be about 8 inches, so it'd be 16. So it'd be a pretty decent size table runner. I am actually going to put this little one underneath my coffee pot. It's in my office, and I have a bookshelf there, and it's one of those like particle board bookshelves. So I thought, I should do this, and then I won't get water on that, and it will last longer. So that's what this is. It's really just a little runner for the top of my bookcase. But as you can see, you can easily add as many rows as you'd like. As I said, as far as the strips of fabric, for this size, I think this is just kind of a nice size triangle to use, which is a 4.5. In an 8.5 inch span of your fabric, you can get 2 triangles. So you can do the math and figure out how many of these you need. Okay, I'm going to set that one aside. So now, because we want, well, we need a straight edge, right? And I wanted the end to be both cream. We need to trim it. Oh, sorry, before I forget, I pressed my seams open in the middle. It was really, really bulky if I was trying to push everything to one side. You decide depending on how you're going to quilt it. So I've got this fun little the strip stick, so I can just, it's got a little round on it, which makes it easy to then press my seams open and not have them gap. So that's what I did. Okay, so let's grab a, whoops, that one's not quite tall enough. I'm going to grab a ruler, and you want to make sure you leave a 1/4 inch from the edge of this seam here to where you trim it off. So what I do is I put my seam on one of my bigger lines on my ruler, making sure I've got a 1/4 inch. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to go to the edge of this triangle. I think that's kind of a safer bet. And lop it off. And there we go. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This side, it's a little bit opposite. And in that case, I want to make sure I don't, in this case, I want it, there we go. I want to put that there. You know what? There, I'm going to give myself a little more room with that one. Okay. Well, actually, yeah, so sorry about that. Yep, we're going to do the same thing. Going to make sure we leave a 1/4 inch, a little more than a 1/4 inch on that. Okay, so with that, we now have a rectangular table runner, if you will. This one's only about, what do we got? 8.5 inches probably? Yep, 8.5 inches. Now, how do we finish this? Well, this is a small enough project that if you wanted, you could birth it. Meaning we're going to put fabric, cut fabric the size we need. Basically, it'll be this size, batting this size, and we're going to layer them. You're going to put the backing right sides down on top of this, your batting on top of that, and you're going to stitch all the way around, leaving one end. I would recommend just leaving one end open, and then flip it inside out, press your edges, and then you're going to have to hand stitch one end that you left open, and then you can quilt it as you like. Or you can choose to quilt it as you normally would, doing the traditional of backing right side down, batting this on top of it, quilting it, and putting a border, a binding around it like any other traditional quilt. And I think that is what I'm going to do on one of them. And the other one that I've already got, well, ready to go, I will get fabric cut and I will show you how to do that berthing so that you're comfortable and understand how to do that as well. And then this one, I'm going to go figure out how I'm going to quilt it. If you have an embroidery machine and you're comfortable using that to do quilting for you, I do, and I like to do that. You could do something really cool on this, or straightforward, simple, in the ditch. Nothing complicated. You know what? I need to get this done, so might just be doing in the ditch and calling it good. So I'm not sure if I'm going to get that done today, but I will get back to it and get it recorded so you can see what we're doing and you can see the finished table runner, bookshelf runner, whatever you want to call it. Okay, this runner, for lack of a better word, I'm going to berth. So I've just put my table runner on top of some fabric and cut around the edges without squaring it up. But what I've got is my backing. I have right side up next to the runner. Beneath that is the batting. So it's very, very important that you put this in this order. Otherwise, you're going to end up with your batting on the outside. So we're going to do that. Then, if my batting is pretty firm, so I don't think I would have any problem if I ran this through my sewing machine with my batting on the bottom. Therefore, what that's going to allow me to do is not trim up anything and just use my sewing machine to go 1/4 inch around the edges from the side of my runner. Therefore, it's going to give me a lot more accuracy on hitting my points. If I didn't worry about points on anything, then I would have squared up all my batting and my backing so it's the exact same size as my runner. And then you'd put it through your sewing machine with your runner on the bottom and just do 1/4 inch. But you know what? I just don't feel I'm going to get the accuracy doing that, so I'd prefer doing it on the top. Now, when you do this, because you haven't quilted it yet, you're going to want to make sure you thoroughly pin this so that everything's nice and neat and firm on here. So then what you do is when you're done flipping it inside out, that is when you're going to quilt it. And so you want to make sure that you don't have anything that's going to scrunch up because you didn't have it, firm and pinned nicely. Okay, go get that done if this is the method you're going to use. And then what we'll do is after we're done with that, then I'm going to just square it up all the way around and we're going to turn it inside out. I now have stitched around 3 sides of the table runner that I am going to do a flip, berthing it and quilting it after. So you've already seen now that I've trimmed up the edges, and now what I like to do is these corners can get a little bulky here, so I just get in there and I cut off the corner and then I just do a little bit of a cut in. Don't get too close to your stitching, but angle it away from the side so that it still has a little less bulk in the corner. Okay, I'm going to do that on this one. Okay. I only need to do it on the 2 corners. And then what we're going to do is flip it. Oh my. I almost thought I goofed. As I grabbed it, I almost thought I was going to end up with the batting on the bottom instead of the middle, but I'm okay. So then I'm going to just reach in and pull this out and flip it inside out. Woohoo! Yep. And then I usually use, and this is what happens when I don't get my ducks in a row before I come over here. I've got a purple thing, and I get in the corners and I poke those out, so I'm happy with them. And sometimes it's a little bit of a, not super pointy. It's really hard to get it super pointy. So sometimes it might have a little bit of a curve on the end, and that's okay. So you're going to do that, and then the next thing you're going to do is make sure you take it to the ironing board and press it really good. And then you're ready to quilt it. This one, I'm going to do it super easy because I'm birthing it and it's already got the back on it. I am literally going to do stitch in the ditch. With that said, I would quilt it first, then we're going to come back to the end that's not flipped, and we're going to probably trim off some of that batting there so that I can then flip this inside out. And you know what? We probably should have done that before we got here. And you know what? It's really easy to flip this back out. You know what? Let's do that, shall we? Let's just do that. I don't normally use this method, to be honest with you. So we're going to flip this inside out. And over here, I'm going to come in here and use a scissors. You know what? I have 20 million scissors, and do you think I can find one when I want it? No. I'm going to just, wow, fingers, cut in just a tad and cut off like a 1/4 inch of the end of this batting. This way the binding, wow, binding, batting, whatever, is not in the way and causing bulk when I'm trying to flip this. Yep. That should about do it. Okay, there we go. Get that out of the way. Now when I flip it around, again, I would suggest you quilt it first and then quilt it up to the point of maybe this very end here so that you're not, for me, I can quilt that. I don't want to quilt that necessarily because it's going to run into my seam here where I want to flip it. So, yep, I'm going to need to cut a little more of that batting down. But once you've got your quilting done up to most of it, come back here and you're going to roll your ends. You're going to turn your ends under. And this is generally why I don't do this method. And I'm a good hand work person. But you're going to wrap this end and my fingers. And then you're going to have to hand stitch this closed. Or if you want, wrap that end, pin it very nicely, and then you could do a edge stitch about 1/8 of an inch in to close this gap off, and then either do it just on that end to close it off, or do it all the way around. And my guess is you're going to want maybe a 1/4 inch in. If you do 1/8 inch in, you're going to have a heck of a lot of bulk that you're trying to go through with your needle. So if you do that, I'd suggest a Microtech needle so you don't break anything. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to go get this fully flipped and quilted. That's one way of doing it. If you're a traditional quilter and, you just as soon not mess with flipping that end, I have this other one that I'm doing, because of course I did a sample one before I started this one to make sure I did it okay. And this one, I am going to quilt the traditional method. So I'm going to put my backing and my batting, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine. And this one, I think I'm going to quilt so I end up with kind of a hash. So I'm going to do from here all the way up, there all the way down. I'm going to quilt it that way, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to put binding on this one so that I'm doing it as if it was a traditional quilt. I have a little bit of work to do before I can come back and show you kind of how we're going to wrap this all up. So if you're following along and doing it too, get to it. Thought I'd jump back in here before I got really going on the quilting. What I wanted to show you was that when birthing it, you're going to want to make sure that press it really good, as I mentioned, and I've got my end turned and pinned. And then as I mentioned, I'm stitching in the ditch. So you still want to make sure that this stays put. It's fairly small, at least this one is that I'm doing, but I wanted to make sure I pinned it all the way through all layers so that it stays put as I'm stitching in the ditch. So that one is ready to take to the sewing machine. Here is my other one, which, as you can see here, I've layered backing down my batting and my quilt, my table runner on top of it right side up. I have also marked my lines because this one I'm going to quilt not stitch in the ditch. So I wanted lines to make sure I kept my angles right. And I'm going to pin this just like I did the other one to make sure it stays put. Also, I've got this collection of Katona Madeira 50 weight thread in all sorts of different colors. And I am going with a variegated one because I just love variegated thread for quilting. So I'm going to put this in my machine for my quilting. You do you, whether you want to hide it. In that case, you can use a transparent, what do they call it? I don't think they call it transparent. But anyway, it's a thread that you can't see. That if you are not as accurate as you'd like and you want to just hide it because you're stitching in the ditch, go with that. So now I'm going to go pin this up and get them both stitched out before I come back. Quilted! I have to admit, I'm not sure birthing it saved me any time versus a binding, because when I was stitching in the ditch for these, I thought I could kind of go up and down and, oh, geez, you know, you run into the border, nothing's ever exactly perfectly. So what I did here was I did the middle first, and then from there I worked from here out on both sides. And most of the time I ended up down here, actually here, and went out because trying to start on the end with that already completed got really heavy. So this is the way I've got it. Stitch in the ditch, and there's the back. I still need to hand stitch my edge. I am not going to edge stitch. So I don't think you really care if I try and figure you watching me whip stitch that. You can find things on Google. I found it's really, really hard to do a video of you watching me whip stitch and hand stitch the side. So we're not going to do it. Okay, the other one that I'm putting the binding on, actually I'm more tickled with this on my quilting. This one, as I said, I did kind of hash stitching. So I marked it first, and then this is what the back looks like. Yeah, I'm tickled with this. And actually, this was a heck of a lot easier to quilt because I could literally go down here, stop off it, go back, and do a lot more without having to start and stop the whole time. Okay, and now as you can see, I've trimmed it up, making sure that kind of, yes, you want it, okay, rectangular, but on the other hand, you want to be very careful that you've got enough so you're not going to chop off your points when you put your binding on. So your points should be 1/4 inch from the edge of where you trim off. So I tried to square that up and keep my points nice. Then I've got a 2.5 inch binding. So I just cut my fabric in a bunch of 2.5 inch strips, and I sewed them together with an angle. I felt like I didn't want, you could do it square, no doubt about it, but in this case I didn't want extra bulk of a straight seam, so I did a angled seam for my binding. And I've got a link up here for a video I did to show you how to do the binding very, very easily by literally putting your fabric, your 2 strips, even out the top, put them right side down, put your ruler on with a 45-degree angle, cutting, and then it's really obvious after you cut how to put them together. So go watch that video. I'm not going to include that here because most of you probably know all the way that you like to do your binding anyway. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to pin my binding onto the front, and then I wrap it around to the back. And then what I do is I finally figured out how to do this. I used to hand do my bindings all the time, but when it comes to baby quilts and things that get a lot of wear, I've discovered if I come back with my walking foot and stitch in the ditch, I can capture the back and tack down the back of the binding. Is it perfect? No. Is it pretty dang good? Yes. In this, it's a table runner. It's going to be flat. Nobody's going to see the back. So, yeah, and I did use a walking foot. I happen to have a walking foot that has a stitch in the ditch foot on it. So that's what I used for the quilting for both of these. Okay, I am almost done. And here we go. I have both of them done. Here's my one that I birthed, flipping inside out, so there is no binding. And here's the one that I did a binding on. And, well, they both work. It just depends on what you want. I had thought I was going to show you a quick way to do it doing the birthing method. I don't know if it ended up any quicker or not. For me, it ended up being a little more putsy because of how the quilting was, and then you have to hand stitch the end. I do so much now with binding using my machine and my walking foot that I think this turned out and was just as easy to do it the way I would a traditional quilt with the binding. So you get to decide what you like. Thank you, Diane, so much for asking how to do this kind of layout with your triangles. If anybody else has anything they'd like me to do a video on, please, you can find me on Facebook Messenger, Wendy J. Haney, and I will see how I can figure it out and work it into the schedule. Take care, and thank you so much for watching.